Welcome, dear listener, to Sleepy Historian. This is boring history for sleep, where the pace is gentle, the voices are soft, and the stories unfold like a slow river in the desert. Tonight, you will hear a calm retelling of how Egyptian priests prepared for their sacred duties at the temple, in a time when gods walked quietly in the minds of men, and every morning was a ritual of order and meaning. If you are new here, this is falling asleep to boring history, bedtime relaxation, and soft storytelling designed for quiet evenings, restless nights, or whenever you need the mind to soften. This is a soft-spoken history documentary, a kind of calm bedtime storytelling where history does not demand your full attention. It simply offers itself as a companion, allowing you to drift into rest. It is relaxing history to fall asleep to. A history sleep story woven for fans of Roman history, archaeology, and calm narration. But tonight, we travel further back in time to ancient Egypt. And if this kind of storytelling helps you rest, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it truly brings you peace. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's strangely comforting to imagine who else, across the world, is falling asleep to these same old stories. Some are lying in quiet rooms with dimmed lights, others drifting off on long train rides, and still others resting with headphones beneath warm blankets. You are part of that small, invisible community now. So let the desert winds settle in your mind. Let the Nile flow quietly in your imagination, and let the gods whisper through these ancient rituals. Tonight, we step gently into the world of temple priests in Egypt, a world where dawn began not with rushing or noise, but with quiet preparation, purification, and endless ceremony. There is no urgency here, only the measured rhythm of lives devoted to service, the endless repetition of sacred duties, and the stillness of a civilization that saw eternity in every rising sun. So close your eyes if you wish. Breathe deeply. Settle in. Allow yourself to be carried into that ancient rhythm, where each step, each gesture was meant to align the human with the divine. And with that, let us begin. Part 1. Imagine yourself in the pale light of early morning, just as the desert horizon begins to shift from deep indigo into a softer band of rose and gold. The air is cool, though not for long, and it carries a faint dryness that clings to your skin. You're in Thebes, perhaps, or Memphis, or one of the many towns that nestle along the flowing Nile. The river is steady, the heartbeat of the land, and nearby, among its reeds and stones, the temple priests are beginning their day. The life of a priest in ancient Egypt was not hurried. It was not a matter of rushing into service or throwing on clothes in haste. No, before a priest could even think of stepping into the sacred temple, he had to undergo a careful and deliberate process of purification. This began with rising before the sun itself, for the gods were to be greeted before any mortal task. Picture a small chamber, cool with thick walls of mud brick, lined with woven mats, and a low oil lamp that flickers in the corner. A priest sits up from his resting place, his linen sheets folded carefully aside. Linen was the cloth of Egypt, spun from flax, woven into varying degrees of fineness. For a priest, simplicity was expected. No elaborate dyes or unnecessary adornments. White, the color of ritual purity, was the tone of their day. The first act was washing. The priests did not wash casually, as one might in a basin in their home. Their entire body was to be cleansed, often multiple times a day. To be in the service of the gods meant to remain in a constant state of ritual cleanliness. The water used was drawn carefully from sacred sources, often the Nile itself, or special basins set aside for temple service. Imagine the sound, a clay jar being tilted, cool water streaming gently into a shallow stone trough, the rhythmic splash echoing softly against the courtyard walls. The washing was not rushed. The priest would rinse away the dust of sleep, the small traces of the mortal world, so that nothing impure would be carried into the presence of the divine. In some accounts, priests shave their entire bodies daily, head to toe, to ensure not a single stray hair could be considered unclean. The scraping of the blade, The dull rasp of bronze or copper drawn against skin was part of this morning soundscape. Even the smallest detail mattered. Once washed, the priest dressed in fresh white linen robes. These robes were plain, but not without a quiet dignity. They fell in straight, simple lines, smooth against the body, unbroken by unnecessary folds. A sash might be tied loosely at the waist. The priest's feet, clean and bare or sandaled simply, touched the smooth flagstones of the temple approach. Outside, the temple walls loomed pale in the first light. Their surfaces were covered in carved hieroglyphs and figures, each line and curve cut with devotion centuries before. The scent of the morning was faintly sweet with lotus flowers from the pools and earthy with the drying mud of the riverbanks. Birds stirred in the reeds, their calls thin and distant, as though unwilling to disturb the solemnity of the dawn. As the priest approached the sacred precinct, the city around him was still only beginning to stir. Farmers were not yet in the fields. Market traders had not yet set out their baskets of onions, garlic, or dried fish. For the priest, these things belonged to another rhythm. His day was aligned not to trade or toil, but to the timeless order of Mot, the balance, the cosmic harmony, which his rituals were meant to preserve. You can imagine the temple gates, tall and massive, carved with scenes of gods receiving offerings, pharaohs in postures of eternal reverence. The gates opened slowly, deliberately. Within, the courtyards stretched wide, lined with rows of stone columns that seemed to echo the endless papyrus stalks of the Nile. Pools of water lay calm and still, reflecting the pale light of morning. This was not just architecture. It was a world designed to remind priests and worshippers alike that they stood at the threshold between human life and the eternal. Each step into the temple grounds was part of the ritual. Silence was expected. Voices were low, measured when they spoke at all. The gods were not to be disturbed with chatter. Instead, priests moved in rhythm with one another, each gesture purposeful, each action quietly rehearsed across centuries of tradition. Their very lives had become the ritual. In the calm of that morning, you can sense the layered textures of existence. The cool stone beneath the feet, the soft linen against the skin, the faint fragrance of incense already being prepared, and the constant awareness that all of this was not for themselves, but for the gods who watched, unseen, yet always present. And so, the priest's day began, not with excitement or novelty, but with careful repetition. Purity, simplicity, devotion. The rhythm of their lives was this: to rise with the sun, to wash away the dust of the world, to enter into the silence of the temple, and to maintain the fragile harmony between humanity and the divine. The sun has now crested above the horizon, spilling its light across the wide plain of the Nile. The golden rays climb the walls of the temple, lighting the carvings of falcons, jackals, and sacred ankhs that line the entrance. Yet inside, the temple remains dim and hushed, its shadows preserved by the thickness of its walls and the narrowness of its doorways. The day for the priests has only just begun, for entry into the temple proper requires further preparation, further rituals of cleansing and discipline. Imagine yourself walking with one of these priests, a man of perhaps 40 years, though the shaved head and smooth face make him appear ageless. His pace is measured, not hurried, for time here does not flow in the same way it does in the bustling streets outside. The temple does not follow the market's bells or the farmer's rhythms. Its schedule is aligned to the cosmic order, Mot, the balance that held creation itself in harmony. Every action he takes must reinforce that order, as though to falter would threaten the delicate thread that kept chaos at bay. Before entering the inner sanctuaries, the priest stops again to wash. The temple complex contains sacred lakes or large basins, always filled with clear water. The water, glistening in the morning light, reflects the tall columns and painted ceilings above. Its surface is smooth as glass until disturbed by the pouring of a jug, sending ripples outward in quiet circles. The priest lowers his hands, then his face, then his arms, repeating each motion with the same deliberate care. This is not bathing for comfort. It is a ritual reminder that one must cast off the dust of the outside world before crossing the threshold into the domain of the gods. Beside the pool, others are performing the same act. A line of priests, each in white linen, their garments simple but luminous in the dim light, move in near silence. The only sounds are water trickling from vessels, the soft shuffle of bare feet against stone, and the occasional murmur of ritual phrases spoken under the breath. The repetition of these sounds creates a rhythm that is almost like a lullaby, steady, unchanging, and reassuring in its constancy. Shaving, too, continues here. With bronze razors, sharp and gleaming, priests scrape away hair from their arms, their legs, their faces, even their scalps. Hair was thought to harbor impurity, a reminder of the wild and the uncontrolled. To serve the gods required smoothness, a deliberate transformation of the human body into something more ordered, less bound to the messiness of daily life. Imagine the faint metallic scrape, the patient movements, the way water drips from the blade into the basin below. Each stroke is a quiet erasure of the unnecessary, leaving only what was considered pure. Now clothed again in freshly laundered linen, they make their way deeper into the temple. The walls close in, tall and straight, inscribed with countless hieroglyphs. Each surface is covered in scenes of gods receiving offerings, kings performing rituals, celestial boats sailing across the heavens. The colors, reds, blues, golds, and greens, still shine despite the centuries, for these pigments were created with minerals that resisted fading. To walk here is to be surrounded by eternal reminders of the divine order. As you step further inside with them, the air changes. It grows cooler, and with it comes the faint fragrance of incense, kifi, a mixture of resins, herbs, and honey that was burned daily in the temple. Its smoke curled upward in thin, gray-blue streams, carrying prayers toward the unseen gods. The smell is calming, sweet, but not overwhelming, a presence that lingers in the corners of the stone chambers. At certain points, the priests stop to perform brief prayers or recitations. These are not dramatic declarations, but murmured formulas, repeated in the same tones every day. There is comfort in the sameness, in knowing that the words spoken this morning are the same words that were spoken yesterday and the day before, and centuries before by priests long gone. In this way, time becomes almost irrelevant. The priest of today is continuing the voice of the priest of 1,000 years past. The rhythm of their lives was one of endless continuity. The innermost parts of the temple, where statues of the gods are kept, are not yet ready to be entered. That moment will come later, with even greater care. For now, the priests continue their slow procession, attending to the preparation of offerings. Bread is set aside in orderly stacks, loaves shaped in small, rounded forms. Jars of beer, sweet and nourishing, are arranged in rows. Fruits, onions, and herbs are gathered, each set carefully upon offering tables. These foods are not eaten by the priests. They belong to the gods first, though in practice, they would later be consumed by temple staff and distributed among workers. Symbolically, however, these were the meals of eternity. The scent of freshly baked bread mingles with the incense. You might imagine the sound of baskets being lowered, the dull thud of clay jars set upon stone. Even here, there is no rush. Each act, however ordinary, is elevated by the sacredness of its setting. Carrying a loaf of bread becomes not a chore, but a service to the divine. Above, the ceilings are painted in deep blue, sprinkled with golden stars. Walking under them feels like stepping into the heavens themselves. The priests, glancing upward as they pass, are reminded that their small daily acts are part of the wider cosmos, as above, so below. The simple gestures of washing, shaving, dressing, and placing bread echo the movements of the stars and the eternal cycle of the sun. The hours pass slowly. The outer courtyards begin to warm as the sun climbs higher, but within the temple, time seems to still. The priest's day is not marked by urgency or novelty, but by a steady return to the same duties. Each repetition is itself an offering, each cycle another thread woven into the fabric of Mot. If you pause here, listening to the quiet echoes of footsteps, the faint murmurs of prayer, and the sweet smoke curling toward the ceiling, you can almost forget the bustling world outside. Here, inside these stone walls, there's only the rhythm of service. The priests move in silence, their lives shaped by endless ritual. To them, this monotony was not dull but sacred. It was the very structure of existence itself. The sun now rises higher, its light stronger, pouring heat onto the stone walls of the temple exterior. Yet within, the air remains cool and dim, preserved by the thickness of the walls and the measured stillness of its courtyards. The world outside, the farmers calling to one another in the fields, the braying of donkeys at the market, the chatter of women carrying jars to the river, fades into a distant hum. Inside, the rhythm of the priests continues, steady as the heartbeat of the temple itself. Imagine the long colonnades, rows of massive stone pillars carved into the shapes of papyrus stalks, their tops spread into carved capitals, wide and flaring like blossoms. The stone is cool under the hand, worn smooth in places by generations of palms brushing past. The priests move between these pillars slowly, as though each step is a ritual in itself. In truth, it is. Every gesture inside the sacred precinct was thought to matter. Each action reinforced the cosmic balance, the Mot that held back chaos. The duties of the priests varied, but all were performed with the same deliberate calm. Some tended to lamps, trimming their wicks and pouring fresh oil into clay vessels so that the light within the temple would never fail. The flames were small, but their flickers sent long, dancing shadows across the walls, making the carved gods appear to shift and move as though alive. Others carried incense, sprinkling it over glowing embers, releasing clouds of fragrant smoke that drifted lazily upward, curling into beams of sunlight, filtering through high openings. The mixture of herbs, resins, and honey created a sweet, almost dreamlike scent, filling the temple with a sense of presence, something both soothing and solemn. In another chamber, priests arranged offerings before the cult statues. These statues, carved of stone or wood and often adorned with gold leaf and precious stones, were not simply images. To the Egyptians, they were the vessels of the gods themselves, infused with divine essence during ritual. Before such statues, offerings of bread, beer, fruits, meats, and fragrant oils were placed. Priests moved quietly, setting each item with care, not as though feeding a figure of stone, but as though serving a living being of unfathomable power. The cult statues themselves were kept hidden away from the public. Ordinary Egyptians would never see them. Only the high-ranking priests entered these inner sanctuaries, and even they did so with trembling reverence. Before approaching the statue, they performed purification yet again, washing, anointing with oils, and dressing in fresh linen. Then with slow, practiced hands, they opened the shrine doors. The statue was revealed in dim light, the god appearing not with the brilliance of human form, but in the stillness of symbolic presence. Imagine the soft sound of doors creaking open, the faint scrape of wood against stone, and the silence that followed. Priests entered barefoot, carrying small trays of offerings, and began the daily ritual of tending to the god. This could include clothing the statue in new garments of linen, anointing it with sacred oils, and presenting it with jewelry or symbolic items. It was not that the god needed these things, but rather that the act of giving maintained the proper order of the cosmos. Just as one fed the hearth to keep the home alive, one fed the gods to keep creation steady. Throughout the day, these rituals repeated, each cycle aligning the human with the eternal. There was no sense of boredom here, for repetition was the point. In sameness, there was stability. In ritual, there was harmony. For the priests, each day blurred into the next, but this blur was comforting, a rhythm that echoed the eternal cycles of sun, river, and stars. The temple was not silent in the absolute sense. There were always sounds, though soft and steady. the trickle of water from jars into basins, the murmur of voices reciting hymns, the faint crackle of fire as incense burned, the rustle of linen garments as priests moved from chamber to chamber. These sounds, repeated endlessly, created a kind of sacred background music. To live within, it was to inhabit a world half separate from the ordinary noise of life beyond the walls. The midday sun reached its height. Outside, the air shimmered with heat rising from the ground, bending the distant line of palms and riverbanks. Farmers paused from their labor, taking rest under shade. Merchants fanned themselves in narrow alleys, waiting for customers. Yet inside the temple, the rhythm continued unchanged. No heat, no distraction, no interruption altered the sacred routine. The gods required constancy, and the priests provided it. Sometimes, as part of their duties, priests also performed rituals for the community, healing ceremonies, blessings, or the preparation of amulets inscribed with protective spells. These acts connected the wider world to the divine. Yet even here, the priest's role was not flamboyant. His voice was measured, his movements deliberate. There was no theatrical gesture meant to impress the crowd. Instead, his work was quiet, precise, and repetitive, echoing the same orderliness found in temple life. If you picture it now, the cool stone beneath your feet, the muted light, the fragrance of incense lingering in the air, you may notice how easily the mind begins to slow. The constant repetition of ritual, the absence of hurry, the simplicity of gesture, all invite a kind of drifting. The priests, in their devotion, lived lives that mirrored this sensation. A steady, almost hypnotic rhythm of tasks, each small, yet each vital. By the time the sun begins to lean toward afternoon, the morning duties are largely complete. The offerings have been placed, the statues tended, the incense renewed, the prayers spoken. There's no rush to move on, no sense of urgency to complete something new. The work of the temple is never-ending, but also never hurried. It is a cycle, a turning wheel that will repeat tomorrow and the day after, exactly as it has for centuries. As you drift through these images, it becomes clear that the priest's daily life was not one of excitement, but of constancy. Their service was measured, their gestures deliberate, their devotion expressed in endless repetition. It is in this very sameness, this soothing monotony, that their lives found meaning. And it is in that same rhythm that your own mind, listening now, may begin to ease into stillness, into a rhythm that mirrors the quiet of ancient temples and the calm of rituals long faded into memory. Among the many priests of ancient Egypt, few names survive clearly to us. Most priests lived their entire lives in service to the temple, their identities hidden behind the repetition of rituals and the anonymity of tradition. Yet occasionally, the records preserve the life of a particular man, someone whose service, or writings, or role in the temple was notable enough to outlast centuries. One such man was Manetho, an Egyptian priest who lived during the early Ptolemaic period, around the 3rd century before the Common Era. Imagine the world he inhabited. Egypt had changed by this time. The age of the great pharaohs, the pyramid builders, the warrior kings, the divine rulers of the new kingdom, had long passed. Now, foreign rulers sat on Egypt's throne, the Ptolemies, descendants of one of Alexander the Great's generals. They ruled from Alexandria, a new city of marble colonnades and Greek theaters, where philosophers debated in shaded courtyards. Yet the temples of Egypt still stood, the rituals still repeated, the gods still honored. And in those temples, priests like Manetho maintained the old ways. Manetho was born into this continuity, most likely in the Delta region, where temples still thrived despite the shifts of power. His life, like that of his predecessors, began with training in temple rituals, learning the sacred language of hieroglyphs, and memorizing the countless prayers, hymns, and formulas that had been recited for millennia. His head would have been shaved, his body cleansed, his days filled with the slow, deliberate rhythm of temple life. Yet Manetho's role did not stop at ritual. He also became a chronicler of his people's history. In the quiet stillness of temple chambers where incense curled into the beams of sunlight, Manetho wrote, or perhaps dictated, the history of Egypt. His work, known as the Egyptiaca, was an ordered account of the rulers of Egypt, divided into dynasties. Imagine him sitting at a low table, perhaps with scribes nearby, the papyrus rolls unfurled before them. His voice steady, his tone calm, he recited the names of kings stretching back into the depths of time. Each name, each reign, was part of the unbroken chain that he sought to preserve. For us today, Manetho's work is more than just a list. It is the framework by which we understand Egyptian history itself. The divisions into dynasties, the first dynasty, the 18th, the 30th, these are not ancient Egyptian terms, but Manetho's own ordering. Without his calm, methodical recording, much of Egypt's vast chronology would remain scattered, disconnected. His work provided order, a kind of multiplied not only to ritual, but to history itself. Picture the priest, still in his linen robes, the faint fragrance of kifi clinging to the air. His shaved scalp gleams in the lamplight. Around him, the temple remains hushed. Yet here, through careful words, he was extending the role of the priesthood beyond daily offerings into the realm of memory. Just as priests fed statues to sustain divine presence, Manetho fed history itself, ensuring that the story of Egypt would not vanish into silence. There is something soothing about the way he organized it. Dynasty after dynasty, king after king, each reign given its place, its measure, its acknowledgement. The names flowed like the Nile, steady, unbroken. Some reigns were long and prosperous, others short and troubled. Yet all were given their turn. The rhythm of the lists echoed the rhythm of ritual. The same gestures repeated, the same cycles honored, the same balance maintained. Manetho's work also reflected the blending of old and new. Living under Greek rulers, he wrote in Greek, translating the ancient traditions of his land into a language that outsiders could understand. In doing so, he became a bridge. His role was not to resist change with anger, but to preserve continuity quietly, to weave the ancient with the new. In this way, he embodied the calm persistence of Egyptian priests through centuries of upheaval. When you imagine him at work, do not picture a dramatic figure, proclaiming his history with fire and urgency. Instead, think of a calm, steady presence. A man whose days were filled with purification rituals, tending lamps, murmuring prayers before statues, and then turning to the papyrus scrolls with the same patience, the same care. His biography is not one of battles or revolts, but of continuity, an example of how even in times of political change, the life of the priest remained anchored in timeless rhythms. And though the centuries have carried his works in fragments, through quotations by later historians, the echo of his voice remains. Manetho, priest of Sebennytos, historian of Egypt, continues to shape our understanding of the past. In a way, his calm recording of kings is not unlike the calm voices that tell these histories now, voices that do not demand attention, but offer it gently, like ripples on water. It is fitting, then, to let his life remind us that history itself can be a ritual. Just as the priests of old repeated their duties day after day, so too does the retelling of names and reigns carry its own rhythm. And in that rhythm, you may find your mind softening, drifting, much as the priests drifted through their steady cycles of life, always in service of order, always aligned with the eternal. While Manetho preserved Egypt's history through words, the daily life of most priests was not recorded in papyrus or stone. Their biographies are written instead in the rhythm of their duties, repeated each day, each season, each year, without end. To imagine such a life, we may turn to the unfolding of a single temple day, a cycle that echoed the eternal balance of the gods. The day began before dawn. In the half-light, the priest rose from his bed of simple linen sheets. His head already shaved, his body would be washed with cool water drawn from a sacred lake beside the temple. He cleansed himself not once, but 4 times, then 4 more, until he felt renewed. This was not merely hygiene. It was a removal of the dust of the mortal world, the clearing away of anything that might disturb the stillness required in the temple. Once purified, he clothed himself in the white linen robe, its folds smooth, unadorned. The simplicity was deliberate. No jewelry, no ornaments, nothing to distract from the service. With each layer, he aligned himself more closely with Ma'at, the principle of order and balance. By the time the first light touched the horizon, he was ready. The temple at dawn was silent, the air cool, the columns casting long shadows across the courtyard. Birds stirred in the trees beyond the walls. Inside, the darkness of the sanctuary awaited. To enter, the priest performed further rites, washing his hands, reciting short invocations, breathing in the calm fragrance of incense already burning in bronze vessels. Within the innermost chamber stood the statue of the god, hidden in a shrine with doors shut through the night. To the priest, this statue was not mere stone, but a vessel of divine presence, a bridge between the eternal and the earthly. His task was to awaken it, to greet the god as one greets a noble guest. First, he opened the doors of the shrine. The moment was quiet, reverent, like drawing back a curtain to let light into a room. The god was revealed, still and serene. The priest bowed, murmured hymns that had been spoken for generations. In his voice, soft and steady, echoed the countless voices before him. Next came the cleansing of the image. The priest washed it with water, anointed it with oils fragrant with myrrh and cinnamon, then dressed it in new linen garments. He placed jewelry upon the figure, collars of gold, bracelets of faience, crowns of metal. To the god he offered not wealth, but renewal. Each morning the assurance that the divine body was cared for, refreshed, restored. After the dressing, food was laid out: bread, beer, meat, fruit, milk, honey. The offerings were placed on trays before the shrine. Candles flickered, incense curled upward, prayers whispered into stillness. The god did not eat as mortals did, but the essence of the food was believed to be taken in, leaving behind nourishment that could later be shared among the priests and temple workers. The rhythm of the ritual was slow, deliberate. Each gesture carried weight. Each word resonated with the weight of centuries. The priest was not simply performing actions. He was continuing a chain unbroken since the first temples were raised beside the Nile. To him, the ritual was a dialogue, calm and respectful, between human devotion and divine constancy. Once the offerings were made, the shrine was closed again. The god, having been awakened, fed, and honored, returned to rest. The doors shut softly, the sanctuary grew still. The priest bowed once more, then stepped back, retreating into the outer halls where light now streamed through carved doorways. Outside, the temple stirred with quiet activity. Scribes recorded inventories. Workers carried jars of oil and baskets of grain. Singers rehearsed hymns in shaded courtyards. Yet all of it revolved around the sanctuary, the heart of the temple, where silence and ritual met. For the priest, this cycle repeated every day of his life. Sunrise to sunrise, offerings to offerings, purifications to purifications. It was a biography written not in battles or journeys, but in the calm constancy of service. The priest's individuality faded. His identity was absorbed into the eternal task. He was no longer simply a man, but a living thread woven into the fabric of Ma'at. This rhythm could be soothing to imagine. The same gestures repeated, the same words spoken, the same offerings laid down. A life without haste, without sudden change, anchored by devotion. The temple itself became a sanctuary of stillness, where the passage of time was marked not by urgency, but by ritual, not by endings, but by cycles. And though the names of most priests are lost, their lives left no monuments, no chronicles. The peace of their service lingers. The incense has long since vanished, the food consumed, the statues worn by centuries of silence. Yet the image of a priest at dawn, moving with calm precision, lives on. In the mind, it becomes timeless, an eternal mourning, an eternal offering, an eternal devotion. Temples in ancient Egypt were more than buildings of stone. To those who entered, they were maps of the cosmos, microcosms of creation itself. Their walls and ceilings carried patterns that told stories not in words, but in symbols, stories that were believed to sustain the world with every dawn. Imagine standing outside a great temple as the sun first lifts over the horizon. The pylons, the tall, tapering gateways, rise above you like mountains carved from sandstone. Their shape is not arbitrary. They represent the horizon itself, the place where the sun god is reborn each morning. Passing between them is more than walking through a doorway. It is moving into the space where eternity touches the earth. Beyond the pylons stretches a wide, open court, flooded with light. Here the public might gather, though the deeper mysteries lay farther within. The floor beneath your feet is not level by accident. It slopes gently upward, so that each step inward represents a step closer to the sacred. In this way, architecture itself became ritual, guiding body and mind toward reverence. Columns rose in forest-like ranks, their capitals carved in the shapes of papyrus stalks or lotus blossoms. Together they were called the marshes of creation when the first mound of earth rose from the watery chaos. The ceiling above, painted deep blue, shimmered with golden stars. To walk beneath such a roof was to enter the night sky, a canopy both infinite and protective. The sanctuary at the heart of the temple was a shadowed chamber, cool and still. Here the god resided, veiled within the shrine. Archaeologists uncovering these rooms centuries later often found little but dust and fragments of offerings. Yet to the ancient worshippers, this chamber was alive with unseen presence. The air itself was sacred, heavy with incense, hushed by ritual. Inscriptions along the walls did not merely decorate. They acted as spells, texts that, once carved, held power forever. Even when no priest read them aloud, they were believed to speak silently, continuously, like a chorus written in stone. Some walls recorded offerings in long lists: bread, beer, geese, oxen, incense, oils. Others depicted kings presenting these gifts, their images ensuring that the rituals would never cease. Mystery lingers not only in what we know of these temples, but in what remains uncertain. Excavations reveal foundations, statues, and fragments of paint, but the full sensory world has vanished. The chants of priests, the soft flicker of torches, the echo of footsteps in high-ceilinged halls. These are shadows we can only imagine. What did the people feel as they approached? Did the fragrance of incense seem otherworldly? Did the cool stone underfoot contrast with the bright sun outside? Did the play of light and shadow deepen the sense of walking into another realm? The answers are lost, yet the questions themselves invite reflection, a kind of quiet companionship with the past. Many temples were aligned with the rising sun or with specific stars. At Abu Simbel, the sun strikes the inner sanctuary on 2 days each year, illuminating statues that remain in shadow the rest of the time. At Karnak, the vast avenues of columns catch the dawn in ways that suggest deliberate design. Was this careful engineering? Or was it devotion, the desire to mirror cosmic rhythms in stone? The mystery is not only in their construction, but in their endurance. Millennia later, the pylons still stand, their carved reliefs weathered yet legible. Time has eroded details, but the sense of order remains. To step among them today is to feel both distance and intimacy, the awareness of an ancient hand chiseling lines that your eyes now follow. Archaeology, careful and methodical, reveals layers beneath these stones. Older foundations, rebuilt walls, hidden passages. Each discovery adds to knowledge, yet the full picture stays elusive. And perhaps that is fitting, for temples were not meant to reveal everything. They were places of mystery, deliberately layered with meanings. What could be seen was only part of the truth. In this way, temples themselves were like sleep. At the surface lies the visible, the stone and carving. Beneath it lies the unseen, the beliefs, the rituals, the sense of order that cannot be measured but can be felt. Just as one drifts from waking thought into quiet dreaming, so too did the visitor drift from open courtyards into shadowed sanctuaries, from sunlight into silence, from the known into the mysterious. As you imagine this passage, picture yourself moving deeper into the temple, step by step. The world outside fades. The walls rise taller. Shadows lengthen. The air cools. The smell of incense grows stronger. Somewhere within, a priest whispers prayers, though you cannot hear the words. You walk slowly, calmly, without urgency. The mystery is not to be solved, but simply experienced. Thus, each temple was at once a house, a monument, and a universe in miniature. Each was a place where mystery met daily ritual, where visible stone sheltered invisible belief. Their ruins, scattered across Egypt, still carry that atmosphere. A reminder that sometimes history is not only about what can be explained, but about what can still be felt. The temple was more than stone walls and daily offerings. It was a stage upon which myths were quietly reenacted, not in drama or spectacle, but in measured ritual. For the priest, mythology was not something distant. It was woven into each gesture, each word, each movement. To serve in the temple was to sustain the stories that explain the order of the universe. Among these myths, the tale of Osiris held profound weight. Osiris, the king who died and was resurrected, represented the cycle of life, death, and renewal. Each time a priest laid food before the god statue, it echoed the nourishment that Isis had given to the body of Osiris as she gathered his scattered pieces and restored him. The temple became a mirror of that myth. Daily care, daily renewal, a refusal to let chaos undo what order had established. Ra, the sun god, also appeared in temple symbolism. Every morning ritual was a reflection of Ra's journey through the sky. The opening of the shrine doors was like the rising of the sun. The dressing of the statue was like the warmth and brightness spreading across the world. At dusk, when offerings were cleared away, it was as though Ra slipped into the underworld, to journey in darkness before returning at dawn. The walls themselves told these myths in carved images. Reliefs showed the king striking down enemies, presenting gifts, or kneeling before gods. These scenes were not personal triumphs. They were symbolic retellings of eternal struggles, order overcoming disorder, light dispelling shadow. The king's presence on the wall made him an actor in the cosmic story, even if he never set foot in the sanctuary itself. For the ordinary visitor, few of these mysteries were visible. The inner chambers were closed to most, and the myths inscribed on walls remained hidden behind gates. Yet the atmosphere of myth reached them through festivals. On certain days, the statue of the god was carried from the temple in a bark, a ceremonial boat mounted on poles, borne by priests through the streets. Crowds watched as the divine presence passed among them. The journey of the god mirrored great myths: Ra's daily voyage, Osiris's resurrection, or Hathor's return from distant lands. To witness such a procession was to see myth moving through one's own city. Incense smoke drifted into the air, chants echoed through colonnades, and the golden shrine shimmered in the sunlight. The god's journey reassured the people that the balance of the cosmos still held firm. Archaeology offers glimpses of these festivals in fragments. Inscriptions describing routes, depictions of processions carved in relief, remains of boats discovered buried beside temples. Yet the music, the voices, the sense of anticipation, those are lost. They survive only in imagination, in the calm speculation of what it must have been like to watch a deity glide past, carried on human shoulders beneath the gaze of thousands. Mystery lies, too, in the chants themselves. Priests recited hymns in a steady rhythm, syllables drawn out like waves lapping against the shore. Few of these sounds have reached us. What we have are written lines, transcribed in hieroglyphs, their original tones uncertain. Still, one can imagine the measured cadence, the calm repetition, the voices rising in unison as incense thickened the air. Not every myth was grand. Some were gentle, almost intimate. Hathor, goddess of joy, music, and motherhood, was said to soothe the weary with her presence. To honor her, priests played sistra, rattles of bronze or faience, whose soft shaking carried through temple courtyards. In the steady rhythm of that sound, listeners felt reassurance, as if the goddess herself were near, smiling faintly. The myths also shaped the architecture. Temples often included sacred lakes, symbolizing the primeval waters from which creation first arose. Gardens planted with papyrus and lotus mirrored the marshes of myth. Even the towering obelisks placed at temple entrances were rays of the sun in stone, frozen shafts of light linking heaven and earth. Everywhere, the unseen world pressed against the seen. The priest's task was to keep that connection alive, by repeating the stories not with words alone, but with motions, scents, sounds, and spaces. The temple became an eternal retelling. A myth was never only told. It was lived, performed in miniature each day, reinforcing the belief that the universe continued because ritual continued. And though the myths themselves were vast, filled with gods and battles, their daily enactment was quiet. There were no raised voices, no sudden movements. Everything unfolded in slow rhythm, in cycles that blurred one day into the next. To serve was not to be swept up in drama, but to be carried gently on the steady current of tradition. In this sense, the temple was like a dream. Its halls, shadowed and cool, echoed with symbols rather than explanations. Myths unfolded not as stories told by firelight, but as impressions carved into stone, carried on incense, whispered in chants. To enter was to step into a dream shared by generations, one that never fully ended. And so the mystery endures. Archaeologists can measure walls, translate texts, reconstruct rituals. Yet the feeling, the hushed sense of moving among gods, the subtle shift from the world of the living to the timeless space of myth that remains beyond reach. It lingers instead in imagination, in the calm act of picturing oneself walking slowly through a temple, hearing faint hymns, watching incense drift like clouds across the ceiling painted with stars. For all that has been uncovered about Egyptian temples, much remains hidden, veiled as though the priests themselves still guard their secrets. Archaeology opens doors, but it rarely provides complete answers. Instead, it offers fragments, an inscription here, a broken object there, that hint at practices now lost to time. Consider the countless papyri that once filled temple libraries. Some contained hymns and prayers, others ritual instructions written for priests who would one day serve. Only a fraction have survived, preserved in the dry sands of desert towns or the hidden chambers of tombs. Many more have vanished, consumed by centuries of heat, damp, and fire. What knowledge was contained in those vanished scrolls? We cannot know, but their absence leaves a silence that is itself part of the mystery. The temple walls preserve images of rituals, yet often without explanations. A figure pours water over a statue, another scatters incense, another presents food. Hieroglyphs name the actions, but not always their deeper meaning. Were these daily tasks, or were they part of a festival now forgotten? Were they symbolic representations meant to exist only on the wall, or did they record ceremonies actually performed? The lines between art and instruction blur. Archaeologists sometimes uncover objects whose use is uncertain. Stone basins suggest purification, yet their precise function is debated. Bronze instruments lie buried, their sounds imagined but not known. Votive figurines, left as offerings, range from carefully carved statues to humble clay figures, each representing devotion but not revealing the full story of how they were placed or why. There are also questions about who the priests truly were. Some evidence suggests they served for short periods, rotating between temple duties and private life. Others hint at lifelong devotion, a career passed down within families. Did each priest carry personal devotion to the gods, Or did they act more as officials, fulfilling duties like administrators of the divine? The truth may have varied from one temple to another, from one century to the next. The grand temples we see today may give an impression of permanence, but in antiquity, they were alive with change. Walls were rebuilt, chambers expanded, statues moved, older sanctuaries incorporated into newer designs. What we see as ruins are palimpsests, layers of history written atop one another. To walk through a site like Karnak is to wander through more than 1,000 years of adjustments, each king adding his own mark, each priest adapting to new rituals while preserving ancient ones. And yet, despite this continuity, some practices have slipped entirely into obscurity. Priestly titles such as Overseer of Secrets or Keeper of the Sacred Door suggest roles that are only partly understood. What secrets did they keep? What doors did they guard? The inscriptions leave little detail, as though the knowledge was too sacred to be written, entrusted only to those who carried it in memory. The sacred animals of Egypt are another layer of mystery. Priests tended to cats sacred to Batet, ibises sacred to Thoth, crocodiles sacred to Sobek. Archaeologists have uncovered vast underground galleries filled with mummified animals, numbering in the millions. Were these offerings from individual worshippers or organized rituals led by the temples? Were the animals raised for sacred purposes or chosen in moments of devotion? The silence of the tombs where they rest offers no clear reply. Even the architecture hides puzzles. In some temples, hidden passages run through thick walls, their purpose uncertain. Were they meant for priests to appear suddenly during rituals, giving the impression of divine presence? Or were they storage spaces, concealed to protect sacred items? The stone does not say. The imagination must wander, filling the gaps with quiet possibilities. As centuries passed, many temples fell silent. Some were buried by sand, others dismantled for their stone, still others converted into churches or mosques. With each transformation, layers of meaning slipped away. By the time modern explorers reached them, much of the living memory was gone. What remained were carvings without voices, spaces without incense, myths without their performers. And yet, there is comfort in this silence. The mysteries that linger give space for the mind to drift, to picture what once was without needing certainty. The gaps are like pauses in a lullaby, moments where imagination can wander freely. History does not always need to provide answers. Sometimes its gift lies in the gentle invitation to wonder. So, when you think of Egyptian priests, do not imagine only the rituals we can describe. Imagine also the countless unknowns, the words lost to papyri, the songs whose melodies are forgotten, the ceremonies carried out in shadowed halls now roofless beneath the sky. These are mysteries not to frustrate, but to soothe. They remind us that history, like sleep, unfolds partly in light and partly in shadow. Priests lived within a world apart. Their days followed cycles of purification, ritual, and offerings. Yet just outside the temple walls, life unfolded differently. Farmers rose at dawn to water their fields. Artisans worked in dusty workshops. Traders shouted in the bustle of markets. The contrast was striking. Sacred silence within, worldly noise without. To understand the priestly role, it helps to place it against this backdrop. Imagine an ordinary farmer along the Nile. His mornings began not with ritual cleansing, but with the practical work of irrigation. He guided channels of water into furrows, his bare feet pressing into the damp earth. His body carried the scent of soil and sweat, not incense and oils. His meals were simple: bread made from emmer wheat, beer brewed from barley, perhaps an onion or dried fish. While the priest dressed a god statue in fine linen, the farmer's own linen tunic might be patched, worn thin by use. Yet both lives were bound to cycles. The farmer's cycle was that of seasons, the rise and fall of the Nile, the sowing and harvest, the return of floods. The priest's cycle was that of the temple, daily offerings, monthly festivals, yearly ceremonies. One cycle fed the body, the other fed the spirit. For the elite, the contrast was different. Wealthy officials, scribes, and nobles lived in houses of mud brick with multiple rooms, decorated walls, and gardens. They dined on more varied foods: meat, wine, figs, dates, honey. They wore fine garments, jewelry, and perfume. Their leisure included music, board games, and banquets. To them, priests were both respected and useful. Temples legitimized authority, provided blessings, and acted as centers of economic power. Indeed, temples themselves were wealthy institutions. They owned fields, herds, and workshops. Their estates employed farmers, craftsmen, and servants. Offerings of food and goods, once presented to the gods, often circulated back into the temple economy, feeding workers and supporting the local community. In this way, the life of a priest was both separate and connected, separate in ritual, connected in economy. Yet the priest's personal life was often restricted. Records suggest that during their service, priests abstained from certain foods, avoided luxury, and observed strict purity. They shaved their heads and bodies to remove any trace of impurity. They washed repeatedly throughout the day. Compared with the freedom of farmers or nobles, the priest's existence might seem narrow, bounded by rules. But within those rules lay a sense of stability, a calm rhythm that gave meaning to each action. For ordinary Egyptians, the temple appeared vast and distant. Most were allowed only into the outer courts. They saw the towering pylons, the painted reliefs, the processions during festivals. But the inner sanctuaries remained hidden. To them, priests were intermediaries, figures who moved in shadowed chambers where gods resided, guardians of mysteries beyond reach. And yet, the temple also served the people. In times of need, it stored grain against famine, distributed offerings, and provided employment. Scribes educated within temple walls passed on knowledge of writing and mathematics. Physicians trained for medical papyri preserved in temple libraries. The boundary between sacred and secular was never absolute. The priesthood also intersected with politics. High priests of major gods held influence nearly equal to that of viziers or governors. In certain periods, they rivaled kings in power. At other times, priests acted quietly, focusing on ritual while nobles and pharaohs steered the affairs of state. The ebb and flow of this influence shaped not only religion but governance, weaving priestly life into the broader fabric of society. For women, opportunities within the temple existed as well. Female singers, musicians, and chantresses played roles in ceremonies, especially in the service of goddesses like Hathor and Isis. Some women even held priestly titles, though often in auxiliary or ceremonial roles. Their presence added another layer of contrast, a rare sphere where women could hold spiritual authority in a world otherwise structured by male dominance. Seen together, the lives of farmers, nobles, and priests reveal a society of contrasts. The farmer labored in fields, his hands roughened by work. The noble feasted in gardens shaded by sycamore trees. The priest whispered hymns in stone halls, his voice echoing softly against painted walls. Each lived differently, yet all were bound by the Nile, the floods, the harvest, the gods. It is soothing to imagine these contrasts not as divisions, but as harmonies. Just as an orchestra needs varied instruments to create music, so did Egypt need varied roles to sustain life. The farmer provided food, the noble administered order, the priest preserved the divine balance. Together, they formed the rhythm of a civilization that endured for millennia. And so, when one walks today among temple ruins, it is worth remembering not only the priests, but also the unseen multitude outside the walls. The quiet ritual within contrasted with the busy life beyond. Both were real, both essential, both part of the same slow-moving river of history. To the outside observer, priests might have seemed detached from ordinary concerns, their lives bound to sacred rules and the eternal cycle of ritual. But in reality, temples were woven into every layer of society, not only as spiritual centers, but also as institutions of wealth and influence. Temples owned land, vast stretches of fertile fields along the Nile. Farmers worked those fields, their harvests filling temple granaries. These stores of grain supported not only the priesthood, but also the wider community, especially in times when floods were poor and harvests thin. In this way, temples acted as both landlords and lifelines, bridging the sacred and the practical. Temples also owned workshops. Craftsmen carved statues of gods, inscribed stele, or produced jewelry meant for ritual use. Weavers and linen workers prepared fine cloth to clothe divine images. Brewers and bakers supplied the offerings of bread and beer presented each morning before the statues of the gods. These offerings, once consecrated, often re-entered the economic cycle, feeding workers or supporting temple staff. Nothing was wasted. Everything moved in rhythm between sacred and secular. Because of this wealth, priests occupied a position of subtle power. Though their daily lives were filled with purification and ritual, they also oversaw estates, resources, and workers. A high priest was not simply a servant of the gods, but also a steward of vast economic assets. In some cases, their influence rivaled that of governors or even the pharaoh himself. This balance between sacred duty and worldly power created tensions. Pharaohs needed priests to uphold rituals that affirmed divine kingship. Yet they also had to guard against priests growing too independent. In certain dynasties, high priests of Ammonius became so powerful that their authority overshadowed royal rule, creating what some historians call a state within a state. In other times, kings curtailed priestly influence, reducing their estates or installing loyal officials to oversee temples. Yet despite these struggles, the rituals continued. Even when power shifted, the morning offering was made, the incense burned, the hymns recited. The people saw continuity, not conflict. To them, the gods were constant, even if human politics shifted like desert sands. Daily restrictions also set priests apart. While nobles might revel in banquets filled with roasted meats and sweet wine, priests often avoided such indulgence. Some sources suggest abstinence from fish, considered impure by certain temples. Others describe priests living under dietary rules, with meals kept simple, purified, and modest. Their bodies were shaven to remove hair, washed repeatedly, and anointed with oils to maintain ritual cleanliness. To live as a priest was to live as an offering in itself, a human embodiment of order. And yet, the line between sacred and personal life was not always strict. Some priests were married, their children sometimes inheriting their roles. They lived in houses near the temple, participated in community life, and shared in the rhythms of festivals. During grand processions, they carried statues of gods through streets crowded with worshippers. In those moments, priests and people joined together, their lives briefly aligned. Festivals, especially, revealed the contrast and connection between roles. The annual festival of Opet in Thebes saw the statue of Ammonius carried from Karnak to Luxor, accompanied by priests, musicians, dancers, and throngs of citizens. Nobles offered gifts, commoners celebrated in the streets, and priests performed sacred rites behind curtains or within portable shrines. It was both a civic celebration and a divine renewal. The festival blurred the divide between sacred and secular, elite and common, reminding all that the gods were present among them. Still, within the inner sanctuaries, priests retained authority that few could share. Farmers, traders, and even nobles could not enter. The sanctuaries were realms apart, and the priests who tended them bore a burden of exclusivity. This gave them prestige, but also isolation. Their lives were both elevated and constrained, full of meaning but emptied of the freedom enjoyed by others. Seen in this light, priests occupied a paradoxical role. They were servants of the gods, yet overseers of wealth. They were guardians of purity, yet deeply enmeshed in politics. They were close to divinity, yet distant from the daily joys and struggles of ordinary people. Their life was not simply one of privilege or sacrifice. It was a weaving of both, a careful balance between the sacred and the worldly. Perhaps it is this tension that makes their lives so compelling to imagine today. Within the quiet of their rituals lies a contrast to the noise of daily life. Within their power lies restraint. Within their separation lies connection. Like the Nile itself, swelling and receding, yet always flowing. The priestly role shifted, adapted, and endured. As we drift deeper into this reflection, it is soothing to imagine the harmony that resulted. The farmer worked his fields, the noble managed estates, the priest tended the gods. Each fulfilled a role within a vast system, one that endured for centuries, sustained by both order and contrast. Together, they formed a society where human life mirrored the cycles of the heavens, diverse, yet united in balance. As evening settled over ancient Egypt, the temple quieted. The last offerings of the day were made, the incense burned low, and doors to the innermost sanctuaries were sealed. The priests, having completed their duties, stepped back into the world beyond the sacred walls. Their lives at this moment reflected the most striking contrast of all, the movement between divine service and human existence. Some returned to family homes, where children greeted them, where lamps flickered in modest courtyards, and where neighbors might ask about daily affairs. Others remained within the temple compound, their dwellings pressed against the shadow of the sanctuary walls. Here, conversation softened as night approached, while the stars rose over the Nile's dark waters. For ordinary villagers, life outside the temple carried on in rhythms quite different from priestly ritual. Farmers repaired tools for the next day's work. Mothers told stories to children before bed, and fishermen hauled in their catch. The simplicity of these scenes stood in quiet contrast to the elaborate order of temple service. Yet in their own ways, both shared in the same cosmic cycle. For while priests enacted ritual renewal of the sun each morning, villagers too looked to the horizon, awaiting the first light that would guide their labor. The noble classes, by comparison, move in a world of luxury and administration. Their houses were larger, their meals more varied, their conversations filled with politics, trade, and alliances. Banquets, music, and servants defined their evenings. Yet even nobles depended on the temple. They offered gifts to the gods, sought blessings from priests, and joined processions that bound them symbolically to the divine order. Without the temple's rituals, their power felt incomplete. Thus, society was a web of contrasts, bound together by common reliance on cosmic balance. Priests upheld the sacred order. Nobles exercised authority. Farmers and craftsmen provided the foundation of labor. Each role reflected a different aspect of Ma'at, the principle of balance and order that sustained Egyptian thought. To disturb this balance would have seemed dangerous, like turning away from the Nile or ignoring the stars. Priests lived this principle most visibly, though not without sacrifice. Their shaved heads, their abstinence, their endless purification rituals, all set them apart, but also reminded others of the boundaries between sacred and ordinary life. While neighbors might enjoy simple joys without restriction, priests bore the constant burden of purity. Their closeness to the gods required distance from many aspects of human freedom. At times, this separation must have felt lonely. The high priest, with his influence, might dine with pharaohs, but even he could not escape the restrictions of sacred law. The ordinary priest, with his modest stipend, might long for more time with family. Yet in their devotion, they found meaning, a rhythm that mirrored eternity. This contrast between worlds also shaped how Egyptians understood mortality. Ordinary people prepared for the afterlife with modest tombs, hoping for safe passage to the field of reeds. Nobles adorned their burials with wealth and inscriptions proclaiming status. Priests, however, prepared as intermediaries, their lives on earth already echoing eternity. Their service to God was itself a rehearsal for eternal service beyond death. The mysteries of their lives remain partly hidden, yet the pattern is clear. Priests stood at a crossroads between heaven and earth. They were not rulers, yet they wielded power. They were not ordinary, yet they lived among the ordinary. They embodied purity, yet were still human. This balance between separation and connection, between sacrifice and privilege, was what sustained their role across centuries. As you imagine these contrasts, allow yourself to rest in their rhythm. Think of the temple doors closing, the quiet of the sanctuaries, the stars bright above. Imagine the farmers settling into sleep after labor, the nobles reclining in courtyards filled with laughter, and the priests meditating on purity in their quiet homes. Each lived different lives, yet all were tied together by the Nile, by the cycle of day and night, by the eternal search for balance. In this way, the story of Egyptian priests is not only about ancient rituals, but also about humanity's search for harmony. To serve, to rule, to labor, each is a thread in the greater tapestry. As the priests guarded the secrets of the gods, so too did they reflect the eternal human desire for order, meaning, and connection. And now, as this reflection softens, we prepare to leave the temple behind. Soon, we will draw this journey towards close. But before we step into the calm of conclusion, pause for a moment in this imagined twilight of ancient Egypt. Hear the whisper of the Nile flowing, see the lanterns flickering in doorways, and feel the quiet presence of gods watching silently over their people. The day is done. Balance is kept. Night descends in peace. And so, our journey with the Egyptian priests draws to its end. We have wandered through their mornings of purification, their sacred rituals, their mysteries hidden in shadows, and their place within the wider fabric of society. In each step, we have traced a rhythm, measured, ordered, and steady, like the flow of the Nile itself. As we pause here, reflect on what their world reveals. For the priests, each day was a weaving of devotion and duty, a balancing act between purity and power, between the sacred and the ordinary. They lived with discipline, but also with meaning. They carried burdens, but also a sense of eternal purpose. Their lives remind us that history is not always about great battles or sudden change. It is also about the quiet patterns that repeat across centuries. And just as their rituals soothe the gods, so too can their memory soothe us. To imagine their calm routines, their steady footsteps echoing through temple halls, is to let the mind drift away from the noise of modern life. In their measured prayers and gentle offerings, we find a reminder of order in a world that can often feel uncertain. Here, in the quiet space of storytelling, we are free to set aside urgency and tension. You may feel your breath slowing, your body settling, your thoughts softening into stillness. This is the same rhythm the priests once sought to sustain, the balance of Ma'at, the gentle harmony between all things. Their story becomes not only a piece of history, but also a lullaby guiding us toward rest. As you lie here, listening, imagine the temple under the starlit sky. The doors are sealed, the incense smoke has faded, and silence fills the sanctuaries. Outside, the Nile glimmers softly in the moonlight, its waters whispering to the reeds. In distant homes, families settle for the night, while priests rest in their quiet quarters, awaiting the dawn when the cycle will begin again. History continues to hold its mysteries, but for now, there is no need for answers. There is only the comfort of knowing that others once lived with rhythm and devotion, that their footsteps echoed, their voices rose in hymns, and their lives unfolded under the same stars that now shine above you. If this kind of storytelling helps you find rest, you are welcome to return to it again. And if you wish, you can let me know where you're listening from or what time it is where you are, because there is something strangely comforting in knowing who else drifts into sleep to these same quiet stories. And if you feel this brought you peace, a like or a subscription helps keep these journeys alive for nights yet to come. But for now, set all that aside. There is nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to go. Only rest, only quiet, only the gentle descent into sleep, carried by the soft echoes of a world long past and the endless flow of time itself. May the gods of ancient Egypt guard your dreams, and may the calm of their rituals carry you into peaceful slumber. Good night.